luck, everybody. This is a rather kind of sober session. There's a lot of wars going on in the world, but there's also a culture war going on. And to my way of thinking, it's a war not between cultures, but against culture, because culture is something which grows out of the community, energy of a community, which includes friction and disagreement as well as agreement. And the right-wing populists and authoritarians do not believe in debate. They believe in a world that is divided into black and white. So there is a real culture war going on. And when J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, opened his speech at the NATO Security Conference in Munich earlier this year, he started by saying, the thing that worries me is not the threat from Russia and China, but the threat from within. And by that he meant European culture. So European culture is really in a struggle for its existence. And I think we've been very defensive. We need to get back on the front foot. What we're going to do, because we only have half an hour, is each of us just going to speak for 3 or 4 minutes. So I've asked Elene to speak for a bit more. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion. And we've been told no Q&A because it's only a half an hour session. But afterwards at lunch, obviously, you can pick up with any of us outside in the foyer. So I'm going to start by asking Elene. But before doing that, Gus and I both want to do a little kind of promo for Georgia, because Elene comes from Georgia, and if ever there was a country with a distinctive culture, it's Georgia. I mean, the food is unbelievably distinctive. The wine is made in a way that no other wine is made anywhere in the world. The dance is unbelievable and completely unique to Georgia, and the script is completely unintelligible to 90% of the human race. So Georgia is a very, very particular country, and Elene, you're in a very particular and difficult circumstance. So tell us a bit about what's going on in Georgia and your role in it.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for hosting me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here on this panel with you. I want to start by asking you to just think about the place where you've taken the most amount of selfies in your life. Just think about it, if you've taken selfies at all. So maybe it's a mirror or the holiday destination. But I'm not a fan of selfies, but I've taken many of them, like hundreds of them in the last year. But not because I wanted to remember the place I was taking the selfies in, but because I just wanted to show the resistance. If you could just show the collage, I want to show you the collage of my selfies and photos that I've taken in the last year. And this is because I wanted to show the presence. And this building, you see, is mostly the Parliament building in the capital city of Tbilisi in Georgia, because this place has become the kind of a stage for solidarity and resistance for tens of thousands of Georgians. And I briefly say why, because like last year on 28th of November, it will be a year, like in a couple of days, our ruling party has announced that they were stopping membership talks to the EU, and basically they were suspending our constitutionally defined aspirations towards Euro-Atlantic world. So it was like a red line for people of Georgia, and since then, without pause, every day, we've been going to the streets of the capital city and also other streets to protest the injustice, to protest and fight for our freedom. So that's what I wanted to share with this, and this is not about me, basically, it's about the perseverance of Georgian people, the people who are just going there and showing themselves every day, notwithstanding all that is happening there. And I also want to talk about what is happening in the sector of culture, because culture has been on the forefront of this. You don't see other people in these selfies, but basically outside there are musicians playing, there are theaters on strike, there are artists selling their artworks to support the protests. There are a lot of creative people, basically, as I said, on the forefront of this. And it hasn't been an easy year for creatives and creative organizations, because with all of this, the government initiated different laws that basically made the life of creative independent organizations impossible. And many of them, especially in the regions, artist organizations, creative organizations, they just had to stop because they don't have any kind of source of funding right now. So, and I say that, and we all know, I guess, that authoritarians always want to control culture. But I think that it's really hard to control culture. It's kind of like a water, because it takes different forms and different shapes. And what I want to say is that a couple of days ago in Barcelona, the Georgian advertising campaign got the Grand Prix and other awards on ADCE Festival. That's an advertising festival, a really important festival. And this campaign was narrated and directed in prison by the people right now who are sitting in prison. And it hurts me to say this, but today in Georgia, a lot of people from the creative and cultural field, journalists, poets, like writers, the directors, the comedians, musicians, they're just serving the sentence, prison sentence, and there is more than 60, and the list grows. So it's just terrible what is happening. But cultural people find a way to resist this, to fight this, and to find different ways to just, I don't know, continue the protest and show themselves. And lastly, what I wanted to say on this matter is that authoritarians can just do something, can abolish the institutions and organizations, but they can't abolish what's in your DNA, what's your identity, what's the culture. So, like, I want to show a video that's kind of a case, what happened in terms of this in Georgia. So during the really, really bad and severe crackdowns on protests, like people, thousands of people just gathered in the streets of Tbilisi, and they danced the national folk war dance named Horumi to show the resistance and to fight for the injustice, against the injustice that is happening in our country. And I was part of it also, so just please, if you could just put on the video. Yeah, that's just a brief, short video, but you can check more, and you can also check the ad, the campaign I was mentioning. It's really brilliant. It's named Birds Never Forget to Fly, so it's great.
Elena, thank you. There's a number of things I'd like to pick up from that, but and we'll come back to that later on. But we also agree between the three of us that because time is short, we talk about cultural institutions and the role of institutions in resistance and solidarity. So you used to work for the Ministry of Culture, so you were in a kind of formal institution.
Yes.
Then you set up the Creative Cultural Alliance, which is a kind of informal institution, and now that itself is in trouble. So in institutional terms, culturally, how are you feeling about the future of culture in Georgia and the way you are working together as an institution, however informally?
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's a hard situation. I guess like all of the organizations who still like continue to work, they try to work more informally. So we founded the Alliance, but we couldn't just continue as an institution and organization because it's really hard to do so now. But we are like working as a like-minded people, as people who support each other. Like one of our members, actually, the Art House, like a really great community space in one of the regional towns, they're being evicted from the building. They worked like for years and they just renovated and did a lot of great stuff there. But yeah, the local municipality wants to evict them from there. And we're just trying to like spread the word, to share the information. And this is also a good platform for me to just share these stories. And we try to just support each other case by case, sometimes to collect the money and funds if some people are fined and if some organizations are in a really bad situation. So yeah, but it's really hard right now, and it's really hard to see also like the exact developments in the future because it depends a lot on not only the things happening in Georgia but also in the wider region.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned the video in Barcelona. Just tell us in 2 minutes about that.
Okay, so it's basically like a campaign that was shot in Georgia, and it's an advertising campaign for pharmacy for the Independent Day of Georgia, and it was like, I don't know, directed by the Georgi Okmelashvili, who is the person, like a director and the head of one of the leading advertising companies in Georgia, who was imprisoned for protesting. So, but I don't know how they found the way, but he basically wrote the script in prison in his cell. He made the drawings there. And then another, like a very famous Georgian actor, Andro Chichinadze, like through the calls, he narrated all of this stuff. And they were sending these drawings, the scripts, they were calling people there, and it's just brilliant. And you really have to see. So, and the name, The Birds Never Forget to Fly, is also connected to all of this. And it's basically kind of a message that you can't imprison culture. So, yeah.
The birds never forget to fly.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. I love it. Yeah. Gus, I'm going to introduce you by just saying in 2 minutes, one of the reasons for the triggers for this session was that Gus wrote a piece in The Guardian some months ago about the struggles of the Smithsonian, or the travails of the Smithsonian in Washington as the kind of central repository of American culture in one sense. How do they survive during the Trump era? And as an institution, they can't be, those of us who are completely independent have the kind of purity of being able to denounce whatever we want to denounce. If you're running a big formal institution, you have to steer a course between obliteration and resistance. So, and then of course the V&A itself is a really interesting example of an institution which was very much about inclusivity in the community, started almost 200 years ago with the deliberate intention of helping people get a better sense of good design. It's the premier art and design museum. So you've still got that reputation to preserve in the work that you do. So Gus, tell us your story.
Yeah, well, my connection to this...
about Georgia too.
Oh yes, of course, and I adore Georgia. When I was the most appalling son. I've got to apologise to my parents. I think it's a good opportunity to do this. When I was 16, I just took off, and I was really determined to see the end of what was the Soviet Union, or to see kind of perestroika. And I travelled through the Caucasus, through Ukraine, through Georgia, in that time of change. And one of the things I absolutely loved about Georgia is just the way in which, as it emerged into an independent state, that it was through culture that you really felt the manifestation of politics. It was them reinvesting in grape varieties. It was through football. It was in all of those sorts of informal spaces that you got a sense of the culture. And I think for me as a teenager, it gave me a sense of the power of culture, of the spaces where we can gather together and actually and disagree occasionally, but also to find points of connectivity, but usually through things that actually raise our focus up toward the horizon. That really got me. And I think it was one of the things that kind of catalyzed my thoughts about what I might do professionally. Through most of my career that I've worked in museums, which I think are wonderful places for engaging, both in thinking about where we've come from, but also thinking about where we might be. And I've done it in a variety of different contexts. But you were talking about the Smithsonian, and I did have the great privilege of working in Washington, D.C., running the National Museum of African Art. And I was there in a period, it was the first Trump administration when I was the director of that institution. And it was challenging. I mean, challenging because the Smithsonian, as the Smithsonian, you actually have the vice president who was actually on the board of the institution. And so, you know, even though you have some level of kind of arm's length independence, you are aware that government can actually intervene and will intervene, either directly, programmatically, occasionally, or through kind of funding, either as an incentive or as a kind of a punitive mechanism. And so we had to be thoughtful. And this was a period in which Trump called countries within the global south shithole countries. And we were trying to promote those cultures and to push back within that context. And it broke my heart. And coming back to Britain and then seeing my once colleagues under the cosh again, and these are some of the most admirable public servants that I've ever worked alongside, and Trump punishing them for celebrating diversity through their collections. And the Smithsonian is a fascinating institution because it was actually established as a space. Smithson was actually a Brit. He wasn't an American. And he never actually visited the US, but he invested in the US and in a suite of national museums because he saw in American culture and values a way of decoupling culture from the hierarchies that he perceived in Britain. And he was really invested in the idea of equity and creativity, of giving people close contact to creative brilliance. And that sense of the revolutionary potential of culture is something that really, really attracted me and was one of the things that drew me to the US. And so it feels a tragic irony that those are the things that the present administration sees as a threat and also sees as being in some way in opposition to the ideals of America. I mean, that is really heartbreaking. But I've had the great privilege of coming back to Britain to be the inaugural director of a brand new national, the Victoria and Albert Museum East, and all the things that I learned by way of values at the Smithsonian, but also all of the things that actually are wrapped into the values of museology, almost wherever it exists. I mean, if you think that the British Museum was founded on this really, really radical idea of being for everyone. You know, its very founding charter was an inclusive one. And that was in a period in the 1750s when Britain itself, in its present sense, was coming into being. And it was founded around enfranchisement and equity. And so I feel, in trying to reshape an institution, a cultural institution, like V&A East in the 21st century, perhaps the most perfect guide is looking back at those founding aspirations of creating museums that are universal, as the Smithsonian should be, as the V&A aspires to be.
Can I just, it occurs to me, the Smithsonian is also a library, isn't it?
Yes,
and the British Library was originally part of the British Museum. So, and libraries are absolutely at the forefront of cultural resistance because they are, well, for obvious reasons, they're the repository of dangerous ideas. And I just wondered what you think is happening with the Smithsonian Library, because I know they've been under very particular pressure, and how they're dealing with that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, knowledge, information, I mean, those are the things that underwrite democracies. Yeah. And the idea that government should see that as a threat. I mean, one of the things I kind of found most, my area of actual kind of academic specialism is Africa. And one of the things I found most tragic is in places like Mali, that when there have been periods of instability, that the ways in which people have sought to unravel communities is by the burning of libraries. And the very idea that Western democracies should threaten libraries, should threaten people's freedoms in relation to access to knowledge, it hurts my heart. You know, that those are, you know, that we are talking about advanced nations, you know, that are driven, that are crafted through invention and creativity, which are underpinned by freedom. And if ever there was a period in which we need to reinvest in that, it is absolutely now. And, you know, one looks at the potential of the digital sphere, and one needs thoughtful freedoms to go around that to actually make it possible, both in so that we can regulate and make those places safe, but also so that we can innovate and make sure that new, good, interesting ideas that might come from the margins are actually constantly allowed to surface. So books, education are critical to democracy, and we need to fight for those things.
I think, just pick up, you talked about freedom there a couple of times, and actually just pick up on that. I always think, you know, the Americans are very keen on liberty and freedom, and the European idea is liberty, equality, and fraternity, that you have to moderate liberty with equality and fraternity, or we now call it solidarity rather than fraternity, because otherwise freedom can also be a complete tyranny. And so in thinking, we're talking about, each talking about institutions, and I thought there are three British institutions which I think play quite an important role in our resistance, and none of them are very obvious. And I'll just say something very briefly about them. The first one is the RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. And for those who are not from Britain, we've got, whatever it is, 18,000 kilometres of coastline and very wild and stormy seas. So the lifeboat service in this country is very important, and it's completely voluntary. It's run by volunteers, it's funded by voluntary contributions. But it also became politically quite toxic because they were rescuing a lot of people who were coming to the UK as asylum seekers and immigrants across the Channel in very dodgy little boats that were sinking. And some of the right-wing populists, led by Nigel Farage, began to say, why is the Lifeboat Institution rescuing these people? We ought to be sending them away. They ought to bring them straight and put them into the custody of the police. And the Lifeboat Institution, which has a brilliant communication strategy, has been very, very clear about where it stands on things. And it said, our job is to rescue human beings who are in danger at sea. That is what we do. It is not our job to be part of the police service. It's not our job to be part of any political agenda around asylum seekers. Our job is to rescue people who are drowning at sea. And that's what we do. And the next day, their website crashed because so many people wanted to increase their donations. And I think that's a simple statement of how an organization that's built on a kind of wider sense of social solidarity has a role to play in these very, very political moments that we're engaging with at the moment. And the second institution, rather like that, is the National Trust, which, again, for those of you not from the UK, National Trust is an organization that was set up so that people could donate physical property for the benefit of the nation, houses and land. It's now one of the biggest landowners in the UK, and it owns and manages hundreds and hundreds of country houses. It's a conservative institution. It's got 5.5 million members, very, very mainstream. And the traditional view of it was kind of nice old ladies going to country houses and having tea. But also, they are guardians of Britain's heritage, and they said, we need to acknowledge the fact that slavery is a key element in the construction and financing of most of the estates and houses that we own. Again, a big, big political controversy, but they've held their line on that. And they've been very clear in their communications that they are not a political organization, but they are concerned with the heritage of this country, and that has to be dealt with responsibly and seriously. And I love the fact that that quite a conservative institution like that, I think, has played an important role in part of our wider resistance to say this does not represent the values of the community.
But the National Trust, like the V&A, that those values, I mean, strangely, that they are born of a kind of Victorian set of aspirations.
Yes.
To create fairness,
yes.
To build equity.
Yeah.
And it's strange that, you know, that the Victorian era, which one would imagine it's the era of kind of colonialism and also kind of slavery, but nevertheless, the underpinning kind of drives of those institutions of equity, of fairness, of freedom, of access, and that those are things which strangely now feel radical.
Yes.
And so for my institution, in trying to think about what would be the source of inspiration for crafting a brand new national museum in the 21st century, we looked backwards.
Yeah.
We look back because it's those founding imperatives of museology, which is so kind of pure and radical. We should all have equal access to these things because they belong to us all. And that in doing so, we don't just build kind of social and intellectual cohesion, but we also craft an equity which is fundamental to democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's great. So my third organization was going to be Led by Donkeys. And again, for those of you who don't know, Led by Donkeys is 4 marketing executives who were just so fed up with what was happening with politics in this country, particularly on the fringes of politics, that they began to put up posters that just drew attention, always with humor and imagination and creativity, to some of the foibles and hypocrisies and stupidities of some extreme politicians. Called Led by Donkeys because in the First World War, the 1914 to 1919 war, one of the sayings was that the British Army was made of lions led by donkeys. In other words, that the soldiers themselves were heroes, but the generals who were in charge of them were not. And Led by Donkeys is really it's about imagination, creativity, and humor. But I think the important thing that I wanted to focus on is humor. They entertain as well as making a very, very sharp point. They projected a film all about Jeffrey Epstein and Trump on the walls of Windsor Castle while Trump was having his dinner in Windsor Castle. That kind of thing happens all the time. And it made me think we completely underestimate the importance and significance of humor in asserting the values of a free and open society and in resisting authoritarianism. Because authoritarianism doesn't like humor, because humor is about our weaknesses as well as our strengths. It's about the fact that we have to have empathy with each other. And Elon Musk famously said, problem with Western Europe is too much empathy. So empathy and humor absolutely go together. And I think what Led by Donkeys do is an important part. We shouldn't forget that cultural resistance is about humor as well as about the serious debate of ideas. And I think Charlie Chaplin knew that Hitler was a huge fan of Chaplin movies, and he made The Great Dictator deliberately to say to Hitler, this is what I think of you, and done with fantastic humor, a complete demolition job of somebody who had no sense of humor. And I also think George Orwell's great line, every joke is a tiny revolution. And I think we very often forget every joke is a tiny revolution, and we should be thinking about the way we use humor in resisting the onset of authoritarian ideas. But Elene, I just wanted to come back to you and pick up some of the points that you were making, because in the resistance in Tbilisi and across Georgia, culture and politics have absolutely kind of fused together. Mm. And I wonder if that's just happened naturally because it's been the cultural sector that has felt in the kind of forefront of the attacks and of the resistance, or if that's something that's been a kind of conscious process of creatives and political resistance, more conventional political resistance working together.
Well, I guess it happened naturally, and I used to say that cultural sector was very fragmented in Georgia. It really was. We lacked good associations, alliances, because people, creative communities were in kind of bubbles, and they weren't talking to each other, working with each other. And what I see, especially for the last year, all of this is happening, and they somehow found a way to collaborate, and they formed some kind of unofficial, informal, unions, platforms, and they're really, really very active. In the first days and first months of the protest, they organized also, and they do so now, different kinds of, things like exhibitions on the main avenue, different kinds of, theater plays, when theaters were on strike, they organized the specific theater protest place, in Tbilisi and in other cities of Georgia. They toured the country, basically. So they somehow found a way, and I guess they somehow felt responsible that they were the ones who should be engaged in all of this, because countries going into the abyss, and someone should do this, and they felt that the culture and creativity was the sector and the community of people who could do this, and they're really, really, really active and really brilliant. I'm really surprised also, looking at them every day. And I also wanted to comment on the joke. I don't know if it really can be a joke, but people in Georgia, some creatives, they joke that the best art and creative hubs in Georgia now are detention centers and prisons. I don't know,
yes. Okay,
it's a joke, but it's maybe not
a
very funny joke, but still, because the brightest people you can find there. And one thing is the people that are serving sentences, but also people are detained for 1 or 2 weeks, so many times, and so many poets, and basically almost everyone who has done something in creative fields, people are saying that you have to go to detention center to be really cool and to be really good. It's crazy, but that's the case.
Yeah.
So are you hopeful? I mean, for the future?
I don't know. Let's see. Let's see.
And Gus, could I come back to you? I'd like to ask you right at the end how you feel about future prospects. But you talked about the role of museums as centres of debate and free debate, and obviously there are parameters to that debate, and particularly the kind of work that you were doing in the Smithsonian. Now that debate has become quite constricted. How do you manage that? How do you think you manage that? The role of the museums, not to just present a kind of bland picture of the world, but to allow friction and disagreement and debate as one of the ways of driving forward our collective understanding. How do you see that playing out in your new role at V&A East?
I think it's a necessity, and I do, you know, when one looks to the kind of political arena, and it is difficult to feel a sense of optimism, but I do have the kind of great blessing of working with artists, and if there is any group who can help us to raise our kind of view perspective up toward the horizon, it is artists. And one of the things I'm really proud of that we've been engaged in at V&A East is a new program of public commissions that get out beyond our actual spaces into the wider environment, actually creating exquisite and really kind of thoughtful interventions in public spaces, working with some really great artists. And I do think that there is a really important role for museums in thinking about how we widen our audiences and really build that sense of kind of cultural cohesion, build those spaces where we can have debates, disagree, but feel safe enough to actually do so. Because part of the concern of the polarization is that we don't gather together to actually hear opposing views. We don't get accustomed to having debates. And it may well be that museums aren't the perfect place for that to happen, but I really hope that at V&A East that we can be an arena of discourse and debate, and that we can feel like a safe space within which young people of all kinds can come and they can see themselves reflected. But also that artists can help us to look up and out and begin to dream and think about ways in which we might actually overcome some of the really kind of scary polarizations of this period.
Well, we've been talking about the creator economy earlier in the day. So in terms of the museums getting out there, how do you see, I mean, the people formerly known as the audience are now the creators. How does that, how does the museum world going to mobilize some of that desire for engagement and becoming part of the creative process?
Well, we have to turn ourselves inside out, and you know, I've tried to do that. I mean, V&A East it sits at the confluence of 4 boroughs, and these are 4 boroughs that they haven't had in the past a great deal of state-sponsored culture, and trying to engender a sense of trust and a really deep relationship with those communities has been something that has required work. And I have personally got out into those schools, visited personally more than 100 schools, spoken to many, many tens of thousands of young people and asked them what they would want from us, and heard the ways in which they would like to see museums change and the sorts of things that they think that we've got wrong. Yes. And there's a huge deficit of you know, in terms of trust that we need to build up, and I think we need to do the work, and part of that is demonstrating a level of humility and being prepared to go to where they are. And so as the director, I think it's really incumbent on me to try and lead from the front. So I've tried to do that as much as I possibly can. So
according to this ruthless clock here, we've got 37 seconds left. We're going to ignore the clock for a minute, but I'm going to ask Elene one more question, and that is, you talked again about the video in Barcelona, Birds Don't Forget to Fly, which I think is such a fantastic title. And clearly social media is a very, very important part of what's going on in Georgia, internally in the country, but also for you communicating to the rest of the world what's going on. And I know that you've often talked about the fact that sort of international support, even if it's just moral support, is very important for people's sense of empowerment and continued resistance. So tell us a little bit about how you see social media, or how social media has played a role in what's going on in Georgia, and how you think that is going to influence things in the future, I guess.
Yeah, I do absolutely agree that the social media can play a huge role in this, and especially like drawing the international attention to Georgia, because right now, like, I think that with all of the craziness that's happening in the world, like, no one, basically, like, not many know about what are we like struggling with basically every day. Like, we've been doing like the communities like quite well in social media in Georgia, but I think like there are not enough stories about Georgia, like on the social media pages that reach international audiences. But it would be really great help for Georgia's creative community if people just check out what is happening there and just Google and see like some social media X profiles or like Instagram profiles that post about what is happening there. Because like what creative community right now needs like is help, even the moral help. It can be like a different kinds of help also, maybe, I don't know, exchanges, maybe like talks, discussions, invitations of people and creatives in like, I don't know, international residencies or any other different stuff that could help them like find the energy to continue the fight they're fighting for like so many like days.
Thank you. Well, now, listen, we really are out of time. But Elena, it's great that you've been able to join us here. Thank you so much for coming. And Gus, thank you as well, because you've got a horrific schedule. So thank you both very much. I think that's been a really enjoyable discussion.